Hi y'all, welcome back. This is part 2 of my ACOTAR series. In part 1, we talked about how the lack of narrative critique of bad and toxic behaviors in her characters shows a lack of subtext in Sarah J. Maas's writing. We're going to continue to discuss that lack of subtext by looking at elements that Maas has borrowed from other works and use them in non-transformatively. And we're going to look at the use of repetitive themes and language in her books as a whole. As before, spoiler warnings apply, so if you haven't read A Court of Thorns and Roses, Crescent City, or Throne of Glass, then you may want to avoid this. I'll try to tell you when to skip if you want to try and watch the video anyway. Let's start with what Maas has borrowed from other works. She has made it no secret that she's a huge Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan. So am I. I would love to get a chance to bond with her over Buffy. It's an amazing show. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. But in the Buffy series, Buffy's first love is a brooding, slightly overprotective vampire with a soul who eventually becomes evil, then is redeemed. Later in the series, her love interest is another darker vampire that starts out as evil and then redeems himself by sacrificing himself to save the world. Then he's resurrected. Skip to about 2 minutes and 25 seconds now if you want to avoid spoilers for ACOTAR. Now, if you've read A Court of Thorns and Roses, this should sound suspiciously similar to Tamlin and Rhysand's story arcs. It's not exactly the same. Obviously, Tamlin and Rhysand aren't vampires, but they both have very similar arcs where Tamlin is this brooding, moody, overprotective fae that does something really bad and ends up working for the bad guy and then redeems himself later. Rhysand starts out as a bad guy, then ends up being the good guy that ends up sacrificing himself to save Feyre and is then resurrected. They're the same characters, y'all. It's the same. And then there are the similarities between Amren from ACOTAR and Glory, the season 5 big bad from Buffy. Both of these characters are these ancient godlike beings that have been trapped in a fae/human body. And all they want to do is go back to the realm that they came from. That's the whole point of Amren translating the book that Feyre and Rhysand think they can use to defeat the cauldron, is because she thinks there's a spell in that book that would let her go back to where she came from. And Glory, of course, spends the entirety of season 5 just trying to open a portal to the hell dimension that she came from, so she can go back where she's this all-powerful godlike being. So obviously there's some differences between the two. Amren is trapped in a fae body while Glory is trapped in a human body. But the origins, again, are strikingly similar. Now, you could be saying that, oh, this is just an homage to a series the author loves, right? Well, I would agree if this was the only thing that she borrowed from. It's not. Let's talk about the cauldron. So in ACOTAR, the cauldron is this extremely powerful artifact of creation that, if possessed by an evil doer, can be used to do very evil things, which is very typical of most MacGuffins in fantasy stories. However, this very specific example has been used before, and it was used by Lloyd Alexander in the Prydain Chronicles. If you're a fan of Disney, you might remember it better as The Black Cauldron, especially if you were a child of the 80s. It's one of my favorite movies. The Black Cauldron was an adaptation of the Prydain Chronicles into a Disney animated movie. And in all three of these works, the cauldron has the exact same powers, does the exact same thing. Maas didn't even bother to change her object from a cauldron to something else. She just left it as a cauldron. So even the names of the lands from these two series are similar. You have Prydain for the Prydain Chronicles and Prythian versus ACOTAR. That has to be one of the worst names in all of fantasy, by the way, in my opinion. Just, it's awful. But using names that similar and then using a magical object, just lifting it from one story and putting it in another, that's about as non-transformative as you can get. Also, Maas has a teleportation magic in A Court of Thorns and Roses that she calls winnowing. And the description that she uses to explain winnowing comes straight out of A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. L'Engle uses a folding cloth analogy to explain how the Tesseract folds space so that they can move in between places. Moss uses almost that exact same analogy. It's almost verbatim. The way she describes winnowing is the way Madeleine L'Engle describes the Tesseract. And then you have Queen Vasa. Vasa is a queen that has been cursed by an evil sorcerer who lives on an island in the middle of a lake. And part of the curse is that she's tied to the lake. She can't leave unless the sorcerer allows her to leave. And she is a hawk or a falcon, I don't remember which, some kind of bird of prey by day. And then by night, she's a human woman. And she has no control over this change. Dawn strikes, she's going to turn from a human back to a bird. Folks, that's Swan Lake. That is the fairy tale Swan Lake. If you're into ballet and you get a chance to go see the ballet, go watch it. It's absolutely beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful story. She's taken this, and the only thing she's changed about it is the kind of bird that Vasa becomes. Instead of a swan, Vasa becomes a hawk. There are a couple of other elements that do come from other sources, but I find them to be slightly less of an issue. One is the Ouroboros mirror, which shows the true self of anyone that's reflected in it. And Moss tells us that many that look in it are driven insane because they cannot accept the truth of who they really are. That is very, very similar to the Southern Oracle in the Never-Ending Story. The elf that Atreyu meets when he passes through the first gate to get to the Southern Oracle tells him that the Oracle has driven men insane. Brave men find out they're cowards, kind men find out they're cruel, and they can't take it. This is the exact same thing that this Ouroboros mirror does in ACOTAR. Also, calling it an Ouroboros, that is not what an Ouroboros is. It's a symbol of eternity, the snake biting its own tail. What does that have to do with a mirror that shows you your true self? It doesn't make sense to me, but okay. That aside, it is a pretty common fantasy trope of not being able to accept who you really are. So it's slightly less problematic than what we've already talked about. The other one is the biblical story of Exodus. The seraphim story is the story of Exodus. You have the sea that parted and then flooded in to destroy the army that was chasing them. That is the biblical story of the Israelites leaving Egypt. So again, I don't find it quite as bothersome because it's biblical, and Bible stories are based on even older legends, so that's not quite as bad. But again, you see this repeating pattern of her using elements from other works without transforming them. She even borrows from herself with her use of very repetitive themes in her own works. Skip ahead to about 8 minutes and 50 seconds if you want to avoid some spoilers. She reuses the enemies to lovers trope multiple times. You've got Bryce and Hunt, Rune and Lydia, Aelin and Rowan, Nesta and Cassian. She just beats you over the head with fated mates, and her main female characters are essentially all the same. They're all snarky badasses that have to learn the lesson of letting somebody help them. Which, there's nothing wrong with that type of female character, but it gets old after a while. Let's have something a little different, please. Pretty please. Even the writing that she uses is repetitive. Sunlight is always described as buttery. She also uses the phrase feasted on me for a very particular spicy time act every time it happens. And I think I could go the rest of my life without ever hearing it described that way. Thank you. And then let's not forget the running joke that is Feyre's watery bowels. I'm so tired of hearing that. So tired of hearing that throughout that series. But all of this, again, points to a lack of subtext in the writing. If you're writing a very deep subtextual story, you're not borrowing elements exactly as they are from other authors' works. You may take them and transform them in a different way, turn the trope on its head, subvert it, whatever. If an author can't at the very least come up with an original spin on a common fantasy element or trope, or come up with different words to describe something when they mention it, I highly doubt that their writing is deep enough for the subtext required to make that Rhysand villain theory believable. So that's it for this video. Next time we will talk about the massive plot holes that exist within Sarah J. Maas's writing and how she uses foreshadowing, and again how that points to a lack of subtext in her writing. See you next video.